On Larry King Now, host and futurist Jason Silva.
I'm compelled to express big ideas. I'm into the notion of epiphanizing audiences, inspiring people, getting people to crack themselves open a little bit. The smartphone in your pocket, your iPhone, is 1,000,000 times cheaper, 1,000,000 times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be a $60 million supercomputer that was half a building in size. In the next 25 years, that device will be the size of a blood cell in your bodies and brains, reverse engineering us. DMT, as well as other classic psychedelics like psilocybin from the magic mushrooms and LSD, are now being used in clinical trials. And it turns out that a single session of something like magic mushrooms cures depression in 80% of patients who do it.
Plus,
awe is described as an experience of such perceptual expansion that our mental models of the world, our assumptions about the world, have to be reaccommodated. And it turns out that when we are awed, we're left with lasting feelings of increased compassion, well-being, and creativity.
all next on Larry King Now. Welcome to Larry King Now. Our special guest, you're going to love this, Jason Silva, Emmy-nominated host, storyteller, filmmaker, speaker, and futurist. Jason has given talks to audiences as diverse as Microsoft, the Tribeca Film Festival, The Economist, and TED. He hosts Brain Games and Origins, The Journey of Mankind on National Geographic, and Shots of Awe on YouTube. What are you?
I'm trying to figure that out. Thanks for having me.
Where did it all start? What was you? What's your occupation?
I call myself a storyteller, and I'm compelled to express big ideas. I'm into the notion of epiphanizing audiences, inspiring people, getting people to crack themselves open a little bit and
how'd that
probe
start?
the bigger questions of existence. It started in Venezuela, where I grew up. I grew up in Caracas, and I was always kind of immensely curious, always asking a lot of questions. My mother is a teacher and an artist, and she always encouraged me to just dig deeper into things, to not accept dogma, and to just kind of probe the perimeters.
Did you go to college?
Yes, I went to University of Miami. Yeah, you're from Miami, right?
I didn't go to university, but yeah, it's a great school.
Yeah, and I double majored in film and philosophy because those were my two passions, big ideas and media as a means of expressing those ideas.
Where did your sense of curiosity, could you know where it came from?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I've been interested in consciousness, and I've been interested in our self-awareness, and I've been interested in sort of deconstructing where that comes from. I remember reading a book in college called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. It was a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, cited actually by Woody Allen and Annie Hall as a book to explain his view of life. And the idea behind the book was that humans are unique in the animal kingdom because we are aware of our mortality. Not just the immediate danger that might surround us like another animal, but, one day in the future.
The only animal knows it's going to die.
Correct. And sort of that explicit awareness causes all kinds of anxiety and neurosis. The source of our angst, the fire in our belly, comes from this terror and fear. And when I read that, it just spoke so deeply to me, and I feel like it fuels all my work and my creativity.
Sure, so, we know we're going to die.
Yeah.
Your show, Brain Games, explores the prejudices that our brains develop.
Correct.
Why do people not like people because of color or faith or sexual? Why? Why do you care?
So many of our perceptions of the world are skewed, are flawed. We have these cognitive biases. We have these perceptual slippages. And in the show, what we would do is we would set up these experiments to showcase the lapses in judgment, the lapses in perception that people are privy to. One of the things that we would find that's so interesting, for example, is if you put somebody in a uniform, their political views and perceptions of the world and opinions will change. Like, isn't that interesting? Like, depending on what you're wearing, the way you see the world changes. also the culture that you come from, right? That is like a lens through which you see the world differently than somebody from another culture. So we have these lenses and we see the world through these lenses and with these lenses, but we don't see the lenses themselves. So we're not aware of these biases that we have. And
how about those people who don't have them? Or do all people have
I
some?
think most people have, yeah, like a sort of reality tunnel through which they see the world. Yeah.
You said that technology is the embodiment of human creativity in the world.
Yeah.
You believe technology is helping us or hurting us?
Well, I believe there's no doubt that technology is helping us. I mean, if you go back 100,000 years to the savannas of Africa, when early humans first picked up a stick on the ground and we used that stick to reach a fruit that was on a really high tree, we've been using our sticks, our tools, our instruments to extend our reach, to extend our limitations, to redefine our boundaries. I mean, that's what we've always done. The philosopher Marshall McLuhan says we build the tools, but then the tools build us in return. Our technology changes us and changes what we're capable of, right? So I believe that technology extends our capacity and is in many ways the embodiment and literalization of our creativity.
Okay. Now we have the iPhone, which has changed the world.
Very much so.
But there have been articles recently
Yeah.
of the dangers of the iPhone.
Sure.
People get addicted. Short attention spans.
Definitely.
I have teenage sons.
Yeah.
I communicate. They don't talk to you.
Sure.
That's not good, is it?
Well, I think that these technologies are definitely disruptive, but I think that if we take the long view, we shouldn't forget that these warnings used to exist for the radio and for the television. Stephen Johnson has a great book called Everything Bad is Good for You, and he traces back how all these disruptive technologies were demonized, and in the end they became assimilated, and then they became what's normal. Now, there's no doubt that perhaps there's things we need to deal with regards to our attention spans and the ways in which some of this social media software perhaps like hijacks our reward circuitry to keep us on these devices. But I think that the remedy for that is better technology, not a renunciation of technology.
Better to do what?
Just to design these software algorithms better, to make them more intuitive. The best technology is the technology that gets out of the way, not the one that distracts you. So
you expect technology to be creative?
Definitely. Yeah, I think we're on the cusp of developing non-biological minds artificially.
That'll write a poem, write a play?
Definitely, yes, yes. I mean, I think that in the end, if consciousness is a pattern of information, right, which is what I believe that consciousness is, there's no reason why we couldn't eventually design an algorithm that can amend itself and that eventually becomes aware of itself.
Tell me about singularity. What is that?
Yeah. So the singularity is a Silicon Valley obsession these days. For example, the smartphone in your pocket, your iPhone, is 1,000,000 times cheaper, 1,000,000 times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be a $60 million supercomputer that was half a building in size 40 years ago. So we went from half a building to a device in your pocket. In the next 25 years, that device will be the size of a blood cell in your bodies and brains, in our bodies and brains, reverse engineering us. So the singularity is a moment when we merge with our technology, when we become transhuman, when we transcend our biology and we become something more.
Is that all good?
Well, that's like
frightening.
That's like asking whether the airplane was good, or whether wireless communications were good, or whether...
Well, if they didn't invent the airplane, there'd never be an airplane crash.
That's also true, but it is the safest form of transportation ever devised by mankind. Look, Kevin Kelly, who started Wired magazine, has a great example. He says, if we hadn't invented the technology of the oil painting, we wouldn't have Van Gogh. If we hadn't invented the technology of the musical instrument, we wouldn't have Beethoven. The technology of language, which is an information technology, we wouldn't have poetry, Shakespeare, knowledge. I mean, the repository of human knowledge is encoded in language. So I see future tech as a conduit to new forms of human creativity and beauty, like music, like engineering, like starships of the imagination. I'm an optimist, but that's how I
can
see
tell.
it. Yeah.
Our guest is host and futurist Jason Silva. We'll discuss artificial intelligence and immortality. After the break, we'll be right back. We're back with Jason Silva. A futurist is someone who predicts the future?
Yeah, somebody who looks at technological trends and makes predictions about where we're heading as a society and as a species.
And you look back, have you been wrong?
Have I been wrong? Well, it's hard to say because a lot of the things that I talk about both in my videos and in my keynotes has yet to come about.
So you never could be proven wrong?
Not yet.
Okay. Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
A driverless car, is
Sure.
that superintelligence?
I think so. I mean, the fact that driverless cars today can basically create a model of their environment and make decisions in real time to keep you safe, even in an environment where other cars are not self-driving and are not communicating with the self-driving car. And nonetheless, the technology works, I think, is a sign of what's to come, of intelligence that is aware of its surroundings.
So in the future, there will be no accidents?
I think so, for sure, yeah.
Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking,
Yeah.
I've interviewed Stephen, have sounded the alarm about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Elon called superintelligence humanity's greatest threat. Mm-hmm. How do you react to that?
You know what? I think that all technologies are double-edged swords. I think when humans discovered fire, when they were able to domesticate fire, we were able to cook our food for the first time. And that changed humanity, right? But you can also use fire to burn the village. Language, well, it's Shakespeare and knowledge and poetry, but language is also populist hate speech. So technology is an amplifier of our innate. Yes. So our innate capacities are amplified by tech. I think with artificial intelligence, both scenarios are feasible. But the way that I prefer to interpret it is when we call something an artificially intelligent system, we make a mistake. Biological intelligence, non-biological intelligence, all of it is intelligence. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to become a hybrid of biological and non-biological intelligence. For example, we use technologies like the glasses that you're wearing to augment our speech. We interface with our smartphones to engage with the world. So we're tethered to our tools already. We're already a hybrid of biological and non-biological parts.
Where is it taking us?
Technology is human imagination turned inside out. So I think we're building scaffoldings of our mind. You know, Terence McKenna, the psychedelic philosopher, said the man-made world is the condensation of human imagination. David Deutsch wrote in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, that if you look at the topography of any city, like Manhattan, the physical topography, that's a topography where the forces of creativity and human agency have trumped the forces of geology. The shape of a cityscape is shaped more by mind than by geology. Right. So that's where we're heading.
Musk believes that we're living in a simulated universe. What do you make of that theory?
It's plausible. I mean, you know, to a degree, our entire identity is a symbolic construct. It's a virtual reality.
Do you go out of your mind? I mean, do you walk around just
thinking about this
crazy? Stuff? Yeah, thinking about this. Like, for example.
Yeah.
What do you think about death?
Yeah, definitely.
You afraid of it?
I'm profoundly haunted by the whole concept of death.
Are you afraid of it?
Definitely.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh, we should have that in common.
I don't believe people who say they're not.
Me either. What I think is that they've developed highly sophisticated symbolic systems that provide a narrative that is psychologically comforting. So I think if you, just like they say the dream is real when you're in it, if you are fully invested in the virtual reality, which is what it is, of your religion or a cultural belief system that provides a narrative of an afterlife, whether it's you become one with the universe or you live forever in the kingdom of God, if you're invested in that construct, then bless you, because it works for you and it takes away the angst. And, you know, we'll never know what happens on the other side anyway. But I think for some of us who continue to probe and ask questions and we're never satisfied with these narratives, I seek to poke holes in those narratives, we end up right back with that existential angst.
I always ask, what does it all mean?
Yeah, what does it all mean?
Do you have the answer to that?
To have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feeling, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression, said Ernest Becker. And with all this, yet to die. That's a bummer. That's an existential bummer.
I wanted to be frozen.
Yeah, me too.
Up next, we'll talk about how to live in the post-truth era and where we go from here. More with Jason Silva after the break. We're back with Jason Silva. You think we're going to extend? I've had others tell me that my grandchildren will live to 150.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of very smart people in Silicon Valley. For example, Larry Page, co-founder of Google, they recently started Calico, California Life Extension Company, a software company for biology. These guys in Silicon Valley are invested in the fact that biotechnology, transformative technologies that turn biology into a programmable medium, like software, means that we're only a couple of years away from being able to reprogram ourselves. What that means is turning off genes that promote cancer, turning on genes that promote longevity.
So we'll live longer.
We'll live potentially indefinitely. There's a concept known as escape velocity, put out there by futurist Aubrey de Grey, which says that when we reach the point that we can molecularly repair ourselves at the same rate that we decay, that's escape velocity, because then as our bodies decay, we can repair them in real time and essentially keep ourselves alive.
What are we going to do with all the people in the world?
Well,
I don't care, as long as I'm one of them.
I think that these longevity technologies will be coupled with other transformative technologies that will make the concept of scarcity obsolete.
So we're going to stop aging.
Yeah, we'll stop aging and we'll take care of everyone's needs in the world, I believe.
We live in a society where facts are disputed, fabrications are presented as real. Do you agree there's a growing anti-intellectual movement in America?
Yes, and it makes me very sad.
Why do people get mad at people who are smarter than them?
Because it's more reassuring when your biases are reinforced. And one of the side effects of social media algorithms that are interested in keeping your attention engaged is that they'll feed you what you already think you know and what you like. And so it creates these filter bubbles, right, where people are splintering into their own realities increasingly more and more, which is a problem because we still have to live in a consensus reality where you're entitled to your own opinions but not your own facts. However, I think eventually it won't really matter. I think eventually you can live in your own reality because artificial intelligence will take care of all our basic needs. But for now, it's a problem. Yes.
Does the election of Donald Trump puzzle you?
Well, it doesn't puzzle me because I lived through the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. So I know exactly what populism can do and how it can
Chavez. He was a very engaging guy.
Very charming guy.
Very charming.
Very charming, but he destroyed the country.
But not deliberately. People like that, they don't think they're wrong.
I think he was living in a sort of self-reinforcing delusion himself. I mean, he did nationalize half the private enterprise in the country. He did censor the media, you know, something that we're seeing intimidation of the media in another country at the moment as well.
Does that concern you the most about this White House?
Yes, yes. What concerns the anti-intellectualism, the refusal to accept criticism, the lack of a meaningful dialogue, all these things are highly upsetting. But they're all connected, right? We've been talking about technology. Technology is a disruptive force, you know. On the way towards this technological utopia, things will change. Jobs will be, you know, disrupted, people's livelihoods will be disrupted, the world becomes more global, immigrants come in, people's sense of identity and stability is called into question. And guess what happens? When people are severely disrupted, when their little world constructs and their comforting bubbles are threatened by rapid change, people cling to their most sort of visceral and populist tendencies. They'll vote for the angry person that's going to protect them. There's a lot of research on the internet that says that people who voted for Trump are more afraid of death. And the reason that fear makes people vote populist is because rationality goes out the window when you're afraid and you go for the messiah that's in front of you. It's all human psychology.
What do you worry about most? What keeps you up at night?
I worry about illness. I worry about countries getting into conflict fed by populist rhetoric that could potentially lead to devastating consequences.
Nationalism is a major problem.
Yes, yes.
I'm better than you.
Yeah, yeah, no good. I think what is required is a change in the collective story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So for example, rather than saying, you know, I am Jason, or I am American, or I am Venezuelan, we need to go bigger. We need to scale it up. Astronauts, when they go into orbit, they experience the overview effect. The overview effect is a transformation in their spirit and consciousness when they see the Earth from space. Kind of like Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot film. When you see yourself and you identify the self with the whole planet, it changes your empathy and compassion towards other people. So it might sound sort of quasi-spiritual to say that the answer is a raising of our consciousness, but I think the psychological transformation that happens when people identify with the whole makes them kinder and more compassionate. So maybe that's what we need.
Is religion a drawback?
I think it can be when it's implemented by flawed human beings. I mean, I think religion is originally a social technology that provides a narrative of meaning and hope for people in the face of mortality, so I get the reason for it. But when metaphor and mythology is interpreted literally and militantly by people who clearly don't understand poetry or the moral lessons and metaphors of religion, then you have the problems, you know, like people take...
There's a guy up there.
Yeah, yeah.
We're discussing the lasting impact of awe, A-W-E, in our final segment, and how to find it in our everyday lives, plus a game of If You Only Knew, but we'll be right back. We're with the incredible Jason Silva. You created Shots of Awe, A-W-E, on YouTube. When was the last time you were awestruck, other than meeting me?
Yeah, I was gonna say, just meeting you. I used to watch you growing up in Venezuela, so it's definitely wonderful to be here.
I was big in Caracas.
Yeah, you were very big, very big. So I think the last time I experienced awe was probably on a hike recently in Vancouver, just kind of being surrounded by lush nature and feeling really connected. The Japanese call it forest bathing, and it's a sort of therapeutic experience of being surrounded by vegetative life.
How can we find awe in our everyday lives?
Well, I think, you know, it might sound obvious, but I think we need to be more mindful and present, right? There's a great line by Charles Darwin. He said, "Attention, if sudden and close, graduates into surprise, and this into astonishment, and this into stupefied amazement." So it's like a little kid who looks at a blade of grass through a microscope, and all of a sudden that blade of grass becomes a cosmos of the imagination, you know. I think we need to go see IMAX films of the Hubble Space Telescope, you know, which mainlines space and time through the optic nerve. It's when we connect with something larger than ourselves, right? Awe is described as an experience of such perceptual expansion that our mental models of the world, our assumptions about the world, have to be reaccommodated. We have to enlarge our maps of the world to assimilate that new experience. So again, seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, gawking at the universe. And it turns out that when we are awed, right, that exhilarating neurostorm of intense intellectual pleasure, we're left with lasting feelings of increased compassion, well-being, and creativity. So awe is good for us.
Steve Jobs credited acid as one of the 2 or 3 most important things he did in his life.
Sure.
What do you think about drugs? Is there a drug called DMT?
Sure.
What is that?
Yeah, DMT is dimethyltryptamine, and it's one of the most potent hallucinogenic substances.
How do you get it?
In the world. It's not legal, so people probably have to go underground to get it.
Is it a pill? Or?
Some people smoke it, and I think that there's a toad.
What does it do for you?
Well, it basically makes you experience a form of psychological death and potentially...
Oh, that'd be happy. Why not? Why would I want to do
Well, it's really interesting. So DMT, as well as other classic psychedelics like psilocybin from the magic mushrooms and LSD, are now being used in clinical trials at places like Johns Hopkins University, Imperial College of London, to treat people with treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, including end-of-life anxiety from cancer diagnoses. And it turns out that a single session, of course, in a controlled environment with the right guides, of something like magic mushrooms, cures depression in 80% of patients who do it, because the experience is a form of inverse PTSD. So PTSD comes from trauma, but when you have an experience that's so radiant and sublime, seemingly connecting with the cosmos, as people describe when they're tripping on these substances, they come back and they're no longer afraid of death. They're no longer depressed. They're no longer anxious. So it's the results are astounding, and it's for that reason, by the way, that the FDA has recently designated MDMA as a breakthrough therapy for PTSD. MDMA is another one of these classic psychedelics.
So it'll be approved?
I think it's going to be approved in increasingly clinical settings with controlled environments and filtered patients, for sure. And I think it's going to be a telescope for psychiatry, as Stan Groff said. Yeah.
All right, Jason, we play a little game of If You Only Knew.
Okay.
I just throw things at you.
Great.
Who was your childhood celebrity crush?
Liv Tyler.
Secret talent?
Secret talent. I'm really good at rock climbing.
Guilty pleasure?
I like to watch movies that I've seen 1,000 times before.
Weirdest job you ever had?
In film internship in New York.
Yeah?
Yeah, getting coffee mostly.
Who would you trade places with for a day?
Christopher Nolan.
Pretty good director. Something you wish you were better at?
Anxiety when there's turbulence on my flight.
You still get that, huh? Me too. I don't, of course, I can't, I've had pilots explain it.
Me too.
I still don't believe it.
Right.
How does this thing not go down?
Completely.
See?
Yeah, we have that in common.
Who's the most important scientist working today?
Oof. I'm a big fan of Craig Venter. Craig Venter created the first synthetic organism, the first artificial life form. And when reporters asked him if he was worried about playing God, you know what he said? Who's playing?
What never fails to make you laugh?
Wow. A really good impression.
Last time you were starstruck?
Right now.
Good answer. What's on your bucket list?
I don't like the idea of bucket list because I don't like the idea of death.
Best compliment you ever got?
That I'm very kind.
Great meeting you, man.
Great meeting you. What an honor.
I hope we both stay forever.
Indeed.
Thanks to my guest, Jason Silva. You can watch Brain Games and Origins and the Journey of Mankind on National Geographic and Shots of Awe on YouTube. And you can always find me on Twitter at King's Things. See you next time.